Okay. And do we have any public comments for the meeting?
I haven't seen any. Randy, have you seen any?
No, I haven't seen, there's public comments, but not on the agenda items or on any items for the curriculum committee.
Okay, then I guess we can call this committee to order at 4 o'clock. And do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So move.
Second.
Okay, good. And like you said, there's nothing on, no public input, Randy, at this time, right?
No.
Great. Tim, do you want to take over human growth and development?
I will. At the last meeting, we talked about connecting back with teachers to get their input on it. And we're partway there. I'd hoped to be kind of all of the way there by now. But I just kind of wanted to update you on where we are at. Allison Schaefer and Kelly Klein. Kelly does most of the 8th grade health, and Allison does most of the health at the high school. They've reviewed them. They think they are a significant improvement
We lost
over the previous ones, and they have no changes to. Did I kind of fade out there? Okay. So Kelly and Allison, to recap, reviewed them, and from a middle school and high school health perspective, had no changes to recommend, and they felt they were an advance on the previous ones. What remains to happen is the important piece of connecting back to our grade level teachers and getting their feedback. And so hopefully we'll have that for the next meeting. So we're about halfway there so far. Any questions on that?
So when do we'll be hearing at the next meeting a final response, then at that meeting will we vote to move it to the full board?
Well, I guess, that would be up to you as a committee. At the last meeting, you'd wanted kind of the teacher input,
Right.
but I don't want to assume that that's all of the information that you need. Would there be additional information you would want before you could kind of move to it as an action item once we have the grade level teacher feedback?
There's nothing else that I need, Tim. I just felt it was important for them to weigh in. So I would like to move it to the full board as soon as we could, once we have that information from the grade levels.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I thought that's where we left it, that we were just kind of that last little piece, but we weren't expecting a big controversy or any, but just to make sure that we had our bases covered.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, very good. Then I think there's a good chance at the next meeting it can be there as the action item, and it would move on from there if you're amenable. So.
Sounds
You mean
good.
the next meeting of the curriculum committee?
Yes. Yeah. Which I think we could easily schedule one for. We can get to this later on the agenda, but I would recommend we put one about a month from now, towards the end of July, because one thing we haven't done yet that we would normally do would be have our assessment plan for the year come through and be approved by the board. And with all of the contingencies we've had to contemplate with the COVID planning, we haven't had that ready yet. I mean, normally that would have been through this committee and on the upcoming board agenda, typically for July, and we haven't. We're still evaluating how we want to tackle assessment for the fall. So you probably would go ahead.
Is there any way we could have this on an agenda or a meeting so that it can make the August school board meeting and not miss, because we'll miss the July school board meeting, won't we? Because that's just coming up.
Well, the July 13th, I mean, we are meeting twice a month, but I think we could easily have.
It won't be ready for that one.
Right. So I think we could easily have a curriculum committee late July and hit the August early August board meeting.
Okay,
That sounds good.
okay, good. I just didn't want to have it after the August board meeting and then have it another month away.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay. If it's okay with you, for the next item, I'll share my screen because we have a lot of attachments as part of that. Bring that up. Okay, can everybody see my screen? Okay, you should be able to see Board Book. And in Board Book, we had a lot of information about partnerships we have coming forward in the area for our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And what I want to do is kind of backtrack to information that we first shared with you about a year ago, which relates to our federal accountability finding for special education, where we were found to be disproportionately identifying Black students in special education. And so let me get us into partnerships here. There we go. And so, we have really 4 partnerships we want to discuss with you this afternoon. You've heard us refer to our county level equity consortium, the Dane County Equity Consortium, over the last 2 years. That consortium began in the 2018-2019 school year. As part of our work with the Dane County Equity Consortium, we've had the opportunity to work some with the National Equity Project, and CESA 2 worked with its member districts to provide a training opportunity at no cost to member districts in the last school year with the National Equity Project. And we have a new district level partnership that's being proposed here. Also, a connection that we made through the Dane County Equity Consortium was with Nehemiah, which is an organization we'll talk about in a little bit, and they're located here in Madison. And then we also want to talk about next steps with the Minority Student Achievement Network, or MSAN. And backtracking here, in 2019, we were found to be disproportionate in our ratio of students being identified for special education who were Black. The ratio, and the report is for this year, was in Board Book, is that Black students are referred to special education at approximately 3 times the rate of white students in our district. And that's a problem. And so, as a result, we, like many districts, because we are not alone in having this equity problem, are required to submit a plan to improve this area and lower that ratio over time. Now, when you have a discrepancy in special education that relates to identification, that's really, even though it's special education accountability, it's really generally not reflective of anything that's going on in the special education program. It more is indicative of things happening in the larger scale school program that is leading to students of that group, in this case Black students, being referred to special education at a higher rate. So our continuous improvement plan has focused on wide-scale improvements and professional development to really reach our school programs broadly to try to make sure that all students, and most especially because this is the identified group, Black students, have more equitable outcomes and thereby reduce the disproportionate identification in special education. Now, as part of the requirements that districts have when they find themselves under federal accountability under this provision, in addition to submitting a plan, a significant fraction of our federal special education grant is earmarked specifically for activities under the continuous improvement plan. They can't be used for anything else when you've been found to be disproportionate. And as a result, we have significant amounts of the special education federal grant that we are proposing to use for these efforts. And in addition, we need to make sure that our plan provides evidence of our practices data. So there are a few different things we've done with this, and I'll speak to this in a little bit. But first, before we get further into the partnership proposals, does anyone have questions or need additional information on this federal accountability provision?
Yeah, Tim, I know we spoke about this a couple of years ago when this first happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I look at the numbers, is that what that 3.03 and for blacks and 1.79 for Hispanic shows? How many
Yes.
times? So Hispanic has 1.8 times compared to our typical white students that are being identified.
Yes.
So I know that why this is there. There is an implied criticism, I would suppose, coming from the federals that we are inaccurately labeling kids special ed when we shouldn't be. And it could be simply because they are lacking in certain areas. And so have we gone through the assessments to make sure that they are validly assessed? Or is that not a requirement by the federal policies?
So whenever a child is identified for special education, there is a process with a lot of different safeguards. You have that IEP team meeting that involves district representatives, it involves the families. There are certain steps the school psychologists and teachers take in preparing the information for that. And one thing the committee does have to evaluate are whether exclusionary factors, are a contributing factor. But we have a pretty careful referral process in our district. I think that our special education staff, pupil services staff, Chris, the school psychologists, you can always review that and see if there are improvements to be made. But we think our referral process is by the book. What we're seeing is disparate levels of achievement that really shouldn't be there. And that's reflective more of the performance of the general education program. I don't know if that helps answer your question or not, Mark.
Well, no, to me, it just seems an anomaly that if we're identifying correctly, which I assumed we were, we have a limited sampling of a population, and it seems to me there's a suggestion that we're doing things incorrectly based on statistics that it's a statistical anomaly, but not a factual anomaly for reality. And that's just bothersome to me. I have no problem with us putting the efforts that you have in the program going forward. But I mean, a year ago we were penalized, I think 15% of the funding and needed to redirect it. And I think where we're going to direct this is well placed. But it seems to be an assumption that we are doing something wrong here versus, and I'm not sure that's the case.
Well, I think the safest thing when you see a pattern of that data over a period of years, because it's not just 1 year of a high ratio that places a district in this finding.
Right.
I think it's safe to assume that we do have a problem, that we do have inequitable outcomes that are real. Now, I think the whole concept of systemic racism means it's not necessarily individuals making a decision in a moment to disadvantage a child. It is reflective of the way our systems operate, structures that we have,
Yep.
that we may not have looked at with a critical eye in terms of how they impact students from different backgrounds. But I think, the statistical language would be that the ratio suggests that there is a problem, but I think it's prudent and accurate to say we do have a problem, and there are things we need to look at. We need to look at our systems. We need at whether our instructional practices, whether our behavior management practices are
Yep.
culturally responsive. Because while we see a high enough ratio to trigger the accountability provision for Black students, as you note, Mark, it hasn't crossed that 2.0 threshold yet, but our ratio for our Hispanic students is also elevated.
Yep.
And so we do need to be mindful of that.
All right.
So, Tim, how much money are we being penalized because of these inequities?
Right. So what happens is when you are found to be disproportionate and the accountability mechanisms kick in, 15% of that IDEA Part B grant has to be earmarked towards the disproportionality continuous improvement plan. And so, again, this is not final. These are estimates that Kurt has developed. But we project, based on last year's budget, that $114,000 of 2020-2021 grant will need to be earmarked towards these activities. That's based on last year. Now, last year, we did not spend the majority of that earmark. It was our first year. We were just beginning to implement the professional development programs under this. And we also had some expenditures that we had anticipated to send people to professional learning this spring that never came to pass because of the pandemic. So there were expenses that never occurred. So that means we also have $80,000 in unexpended funds from 2019-2020. So the total we believe we'll have available for the upcoming year is almost $200,000.
And that's from the 15% only, right?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk now a little bit about the National Equity Project. Again, the National Equity Project, we've had the opportunity to receive some technical assistance from the National Equity Project indirectly through the Dane County Equity Consortium. Several of us, and in fact, Randy, Amy, and I were part of the team that participated in the CISA training this year, which actually a year ago, when we were planning activities to make headway on our disproportionality plan, attending this type of training was something we had envisioned under the plan. This time last year, we thought we were going to have to send people to Chicago and pay for the registration and associated expenses. Then CISA 2 brought the training into our region. And then CISA 2, and a lot of credit to Dan Hanrahan, the agency administrator at CISA 2, he secured foundation funding for the registration. So, Waunakee and the other participating districts, we didn't have to pay registration. So something that we had anticipated we would have to spend to access, we ended up being able to access for free thanks to CISA 2. Now, after our participation in this, we were approached this spring by representatives for the National Equity Project to participate in what they call a Learning for Equity Redesign Network. And this would be a network of other upper Midwestern school districts that would receive additional training from the National Equity Project and also collaborate on sharing practices. Now, something that's a special opportunity with this network invitation this year is because of the overall COVID situation, the National Equity Project is taking what would normally be an in-person regional network, which would involve travel within the region, which might potentially add some barriers in terms of how many people could participate. And they've made the design decision for this year's network that it's going to be virtual. Now, of course, there are trade-offs when you do something virtually, but it also means that the barriers to participation are much reduced. There's technically, under this, no limit to how many staff we can have participate in these virtual meetings. So once we have the approval, we will have a follow-up conversation with the National Equity Project and begin to recruit teams. But these will not only be administrative teams. We will have pupil services professionals, we will have teachers. We anticipate we'll be able to involve a lot of our staff in the activities associated with the network. Now, the National Equity Project is one of the leading ed reform organizations that do work in this area. Their work is national. They're based in Oakland. They have an important regional office in Chicago. And many districts in our region, even before CISA 2 organized the regional training, have been partnering with the National Equity Project. And so what we have here is a one-year commitment. This contract reflects a one-year commitment. It's possible that the network could continue beyond 2020, 2021, but this is something we would certainly look at as a year-to-year basis. And I don't know if you had a chance to kind of review the contract that was in board book. If you want to, I can bring it up. It was a typical contract, but it also detailed a little bit more specifically what activities would happen under the aegis of the Equity Redesign Network.
Could I just ask one thing? If we're going to be opening this up to many staff people, with the pressures that we're under for how we're going to deliver education to kids, are teachers and staff going to have the time or the energy to participate in as many of these things as we would have in, say, a normal year?
You know, I think Judy, that's a very good question, and it's one I would be speculating if I offered an answer to you right now. And I'm sure we're going to have people, I just can't tell you how many, that may have circumstances that will make their participation more challenging than it would have been under different circumstances. But I think we will have members of our team who may be even more engaged in this work. You know, I think whenever you have a crisis like we have with the pandemic, it highlights existing inequities that we have in many aspects of life. And I think we've seen that with the COVID pandemic. You know, I can say that for us and for every school district I talk with, thinking about how to safeguard against the challenges of the COVID challenge from exacerbating existing inequities is an important focus for us. And it's also the case that we are having a higher profile national conversation and a higher profile community conversation around issues of equity and inclusion that I think despite all of the challenges people may be experiencing with the pandemic, may actually increase a desire to participate in this work. We certainly have seen that with some of the book studies that we've been organizing this summer.
When you talk about book studies or the numbers that could come, are we talking 50, 300? What is your general sense who might be able to or would like to participate?
So, I mean, I think for something like this, if we end up with, and we have to kind of talk to the National Equity Project and kind of see how the different work groups under this network kind of organize, because we would be one district among, I think, perhaps 7 or 8. It's not totally ours to design. But, I think if we end up with, 40 or 50 of our staff being deeply engaged in this and then bringing that learning back to their colleagues, I think that would be successful. I know one thing we've approached Heidi Gill, who is the representative for National Equity Project that we've been coordinating this with, is, we've had a lot of interest in looking critically at our curriculum and what kind of experiences we provide our students about inequities in society, the history of discrimination in the United States. And that's probably going to be a topic that the other districts also are interested in sharing information on. So I think that's one thing in particular that I think we would do. But I would estimate, 40 to 50, Judy.
Okay.
I was impressed with the design. Potentially, it looks to me we could do something comparable to how we started with the PACs.
Mm-hmm.
Start with a leadership group and expand it each year. Judy's concern about constraint with teaching models and overload is, I think, legitimate, but I still think there would be a cadre of staff that would be great leaders that would be the starting point. It looked to me like a really well-structured and program with a lot of learning opportunities that I thought would be a benefit.
I mean, I think a lot of our teachers are very eager for this work. I mean, the WTA, and I think you've heard Kyle and Ashley say this over the last few years, they have had equity as a goal for the WTA the last few years, and they've been looking both within the WTA framework and ways to partner with us to become more engaged in this type of professional learning. And so I think I'm optimistic we will have a lot of teacher and staff interest in this. So I'm going to move on to the next piece, which is a project that we are proposing to partner with Nehemiah in. And this relates to our social studies program in the district. I don't know if you had an opportunity to click on the link here, but if you have not, I would encourage after the meeting that you do so. And when this comes, hopefully, to the full board on July 13th, I'm going to encourage that people view this ahead of time, just so they understand the Nehemiah story a little better. Nehemiah is headquartered here in Dane County. The full name of the organization is the Nehemiah Center for Urban Leadership Development. And there's some information here in the deck about Nehemiah. And, we've been aware of their work for some time. They have many initiatives that work positively through the greater Madison community in many ways, shapes, or forms. But one of the ones that touches on education that we've been aware of for a few years is their African American History course, which is a series of 9 Monday evenings that occur in the winter and early spring. 9 evening meetings on consecutive weeks is a pretty big commitment, and we've tried to recruit people in the last few years to participate in it. Scheduling has proven to be a challenge, at least for us. They actually have huge participation in this program, but up until now, we've had limited participation. This year, we did have one of our social studies teachers at the high school, Lauren Michaels, able to participate. She was highly positive about it. And at one of our Dane County Equity Consortium meetings back in the fall, there's a panel discussion on human resources practices and what school districts can do to diversify, staff, recruit a more diverse staff, retain a more diverse staff. And one of the panelists was Harry Hawkins, who's the vice president for Nehemiah. And after the meeting was over, had a conversation, with Harry Hawkins and inquired, was the African American history course being offered again? And he said yes. And but in the course of our conversation, I also realized we had the opportunity to bring Nehemiah in to work with our folks. And so growing out of this, Jackson Gabriel, our social studies chair for the district, and I have had some conversations with Nehemiah. Eric Gutenberg, one of our high school APs, has been a building level representative, for these discussions. And what we're proposing here is to partner with Nehemiah on a project to reflect on and update our social studies offerings for our students, to more comprehensively reflect the African American experience in American life and really also in world history. And so this would involve a needs assessment with school and district leaders, teachers, probably some of our students. And then we would have work over 8 to 16 months, kind of depending on what scheduling permits. We are being a little flexible with our timelines here because we don't know over the course of this project how much of this is going to have to occur virtually and how much of this will have the opportunity to conduct face-to-face. We're focusing on social studies for a few reasons. First, we feel the need to focus on one content area just because if this does entail releasing people to participate during the day, there's only so much sub-coverage we have to make staff available. So although some of this would be valuable for any educator, we have to, I think, at least initially be selective on who we involve in this from a sub-coverage standpoint. The other thing is a consistent theme in the feedback that we've received from our students, our Justice League students, our BSU students, is that our social studies curriculum really could use a critical look in this area. If you've had an opportunity to meet with our kids, you've heard this, both in terms of the courses that all students experience as part of our social studies program, and potentially down the road, additional electives. And so leading with social studies here is really in response to the requests of our students.
So Tim, again, I thought this was a really impressive opportunity. My question is, if we're going to be looking at a specific curriculum for potential change because of limited exposure to some of the realities of slavery, the Black experience, shouldn't we likewise be incorporating the Hispanic and Native American as well? And I know that's not the mission of the Nehemiah group, but by embracing one group, we really limit our focus on what we could be doing when maybe there should be a multiple perspective that we explore for curriculum revision, not just a singular lens. And I don't know if there's a comparable Native American group that would be able to work with them as well. I don't know if that's, how many groups you'd really want to work with, but that was the one thing that hit me. I think this is certainly worthwhile, but our history has been wonderfully quiet about more than just the Black experience.
So, Mark, I agree with you, and I think as a longer-term project, I would agree with all of that. I don't think we can do it all at once. Nehemiah is here. I think we would start with this. We had a Dane County Equity Consortium meeting. Maybe January is maybe our January meeting, where some of our other districts in the county were profiling what they've done in this area, and Verona has had a partnership with a group, I think out of Arizona, that specializes in this more from the Latino experience. And I agree with you, Mark, that another aspect of this, Wisconsin does have in our social studies standards a very specific set of instructions around presenting the Native American experience in Wisconsin history. But I do think that is another area that deserves special attention over the next few years as we look at how our social studies curriculum is presented. So I would say just because we have a proposal with Nehemiah this year to look at the African American history, we would want to come back in the next few years and ask similar questions about Latino history and also the Native American experience.
Well, and again, I know this is a response to our disproportionality, and therefore we have to do something. But particularly, here's the thing: the Black Lives Matter movement, the whole thing, has shown such a spotlight on the one problem, and I think it's something we need to do. I like everything I've seen in here, but in fact, our greatest minority group, the Hispanic group, we're quiet to. I don't see anything being done responsibly for our largest minority group. And so I'm a little concerned how that's going to be perceived by that group of our students. It's great we're going to do all this stuff, but it seems to me, and that's why I'm in the middle of reading culturally responsive teaching. And I love that because it isn't centered on just one ethnicity or racial situation, although it genesis from that. It includes all ethnicities and races. And I'm a little concerned that for a group that is as significant as it is in our student body, who have had significant problems over the last several years with racist behavior and treatment, unwelcoming situations. Right now, I'm seeing a total focus on only one aspect of our equity reality.
So, Mark, I'm not sure this will assuage your concerns. I think it's certainly accurate that the Nehemiah project is focused on our social studies program, and in particular, as it relates to the African American experience. I do think some of the work that will occur through that will have a broader implication, but there's no question where the focus is on this. I should back up and say, with the National Equity Project work, the work of the National Equity Project is broadly construed. So that that regional network is going to look at diversity and inclusion questions across the entire spectrum.
Okay.
It's because it will touch on improving, hopefully, the experience for our Black students. We're able to fund it under the federal grants, but the National Equity Project work is broad, as is
MSAN.
as is MSAN. So I mean,
Right. Okay.
the Minority Student Achievement Network, we are going to put in an application for membership, with your approval. And a little bit about MSAN is, again, this has a broad mandate to look at addressing opportunity and achievement gaps in schools. And when you look at the description of the type of district that have associated themselves in MSAN, you see by size, location, and characteristics, that's a profile that matches Waunakee. And MSAN, like Nehemiah, is an organization that's actually headquartered here in Dane County. The office is in the School of Education at UW-Madison. And we do have some Dane County districts that are already MSAN members, but to be clear, MSAN is a national organization. Mark, you've been to,
Yep.
and I think had we had a normal spring instead of our disrupted pandemic spring, I think, Joan, you were planning to attend, and Judy, I think you were planning to attend too. I think you both were, and it got disrupted by the COVID. But so again, MSAN, and so if you, the student panel at MSAN is something, Mark, you would have seen, and that's a broad,
no question,
broad
very broad. Yeah,
very broad.
I remember Verona presenting what they have been doing for their Hispanic population, and very impressive involvement of what they've done over there. So, but no, I agree.
And one of the great things about MSAN that I think distinguishes it from the other two here, and there's a lot of positives for MSAN, and there's that attachment that talks about the benefits of MSAN membership. But MSAN has always tried to, in its work, elevate the student voice. So there is an annual student conference. I don't know in our current situation how they're going to do that, but I know they will do something. It may be virtual. But youth leadership development is an important part of that. And I think there's going to be a lot of benefit for the professional staff, which thereby translates to hopefully benefits to our students. But with MSAN, we anticipate direct benefits to our students as well because of the focus on youth leadership development. So, so again, these are the three, and we're bringing them in partly because, certainly the costs associated with this, although we certainly have more than enough funds earmarked for these types of activities already, but also because, this is a topic of great concern, to our teachers and staff. It's of great concern to our families, our students, the community. I know you've had community members and alumni, reach out to you. And the financial obligations of these partnerships aside, we felt it was really important to make sure you were aware of these partnerships that we do have in the pipeline to try to make progress on these questions in our district. And last but not least, I want to touch on some of the other activities we have in progress. So,
And before you go,
yeah.
so the financing, it looks like we have just short of 200,000 in the IDEA money that has to be redirected.
Yes.
And so 80 was transferred from last year.
Mhm.
Looks like we're using about 90 of that amount. Will that other resources then be used for ongoing expenses, whether it's staffing, programming, to benefit the kids? Or if it's not used, does that get transferred to, is there a penalty for not using the full 15%? Or can you redirect it if it's not used to next year again for ongoing?
So you can carry it over, and I would need to ask Kurt, and because we're only in our second year, we may need to get some clarification from DPI. We
Okay.
can kind of bring an answer back to that question, when we have the board meeting on July 13th, Mark.
Sure.
But, there are some other things that could happen. So, for example, we belong to the Dane County Equity Consortium. That's an allowable expense under the grant. If you think back to last year, we had Percy Brown come in for our staff development day in August. We had Amanda Goodenough in late February. So there are other professional learning activities that we can envision happening on this. We have some book studies, that are occurring this summer. One of them, Mark, is culturally responsive teaching in the brain. So, when we purchase those texts for our people, those are allowable expenses under the grant. So there are other ways we can productively utilize these funds to advance the purpose of the continuous improvement plan, okay, besides these three, but these are probably the biggest three elements this year.
So do you need board approval, or do you want board approval? So do we vote to move this to the full board, or how does that work? Because each one of them is separate, it doesn't need to be?
So, it's an interesting thing, under our purchasing guidelines, when we have a single source professional services arrangement, the need for approval looks a little different, and these are all single source professional services. But I think it is a very powerful statement of endorsement in this work. And the importance, I think an actual vote would be a powerful endorsement. And I would certainly welcome that kind of endorsement, and I think we all would.
So you're saying maybe this committee should present it to the board and ask for their endorsement. That's what we're recommending?
I am. I think it would be very, very productive to have the board endorsing these activities.
So I move the committee endorse it and move it forward for full board endorsement at the next meeting.
Second.
Great. We need to vote on that, people? I don't think we do. Or do we?
If it makes us feel better, we can, but we don't technically have to.
All right, let's not then. Let's just move it along.
Okay.
I'm all in favor.
And just the last thing I kind of want to highlight, as you know, we have other activities. So we have some technical assistance from CISA 2 on doing a better job with our continuous improvement plan. That's item 1. We're still in the process of putting together our back to school activities, but we do envision continuing to work with Percy Brown. We felt, he really was really a good fit for our staff and had a really positive message for our staff last year. Would like to continue that. We have our student affinity groups, Los Sonadores, BSU, Justice League, and others. We continue to participate in the Dane County Equity Consortium. I've referenced book studies a few times in the course of this topic today. We are always now, when we look at our curriculum and instructional materials, we do look for inclusion and representation. And thanks to you as a board, and thank you for collectively the full board's leadership in this, we have the ad hoc committee that is going to bring together a bunch of stakeholders to give us, to explore these issues and provide us with suggestions. So we have a lot of things going on besides these three partnerships. And that's what I have for an update.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
And so that brings, I'm
How
going to
do you
stop
do all
sharing
this with the
my-
COVID going on?
Yeah. Well, like I said, it's crises like the COVID, if they do nothing else that's positive, they really encourage all of us, I think, as educators, when we have these challenges, to try to think very intentionally about how we can protect our most vulnerable kids. And they highlight challenges we all face as Americans in our society, and how to make that truly inclusive and equitable for everybody. And so, none of us asked for COVID, but I think COVID, by and large, underscores the need for these types of activities.
Well done.
Yes, thank you, Tim. This is a humongous amount of work. Thank you.
You're welcome. So items for upcoming meetings, I think Human Growth and Development will be coming back, and Amy and I couldn't tell you today exactly what our assessment plan is going to look like for the upcoming year, but we do know we need to get you something, and we do hope within the next few weeks we have more clarity about what the start of the year will look like. The assessment plan may look a little more different than it has in the past, but we know we need to bring something, for your review. It may contain some different options depending on what hand we get dealt in the upcoming school year. So those are two items for upcoming meetings.
Do you want to look at the calendar for the end of July and see if there's a date that works so we can get it scheduled?
Absolutely.
Kim, how are the results of the survey coming in? Any idea how many people have responded?
So we have a lot of responses. We have over, when I checked earlier this afternoon, we had passed 2,260.
Wow.
Which is a lot.
Fabulous.
And when you see that, remember, a lot of our parents have students in multiple schools.
2, 3,
Right,
10.
right.
Yeah, so you're representing a lot more.
Right. So, I think we have responses for each school that would be at least 2/3 of the students per that level or more. So very robust. We'll close it tonight. We'll see where we end up, but that's a lot. If you think about other surveys you've seen in the past, 2,200 plus is a lot. We may end up higher. I saw a document that Chris Mand had shared with us about Stevens Point's planning process. And Stevens Point is a larger community than Waunakee. And I noted with interest that their parent survey had 968 respondents. So we've more than doubled points numbers in a smaller community. So I think that's testimony to the engagement of our families. And we'll talk more about this when the results come forward, but we'll be getting you those as soon as we close the surveys.
Thank you. Okay. What week are we looking at? The very last week, the week of the 27th?
I think that would be best if that works for your schedules.
I am really open that week, the whole week.
Me
I am
too.
also open.
Likewise.
Maybe Tuesday the 28th.
Okay.
Would 4 p.m. work again?
Sure.
Yes. And thank you for changing to tonight from last night. Helped my schedule. Thank you.
Yeah, well, we're always happy to do that. It's important. You can run a committee shorthanded, but really wanted all of you to hear the update on the diversity, equity, and inclusion partnerships. So.
Okay, good. All right, if we have nothing else, are we ready to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
All right.
Okay, I'll second.
All right. Randy, I have one question before, nothing to do with the curriculum, but one question before. So if everybody wants to go, that's fine. I just have a question for you.
Sure.
You mentioned, I said I wasn't available for the follow-up on the interview committee, but if you.
Happy 4th.
Bye-bye.